I never thought I'd be writing a post like this. I'm not even sure why I'm doing it now, but I guess I need to get it out there. If there's anything I've learned in the past year, it's that things can change so damn fast. 1 minute, you're living your life, thinking everything's fine, and the next, bam! You're staring at a shattered reality. I don't want to get into the perfect couple stuff too much, but things with Buffy and me were pretty solid. We'd been together for 7 years, married for 5. Yeah, there were your usual bumps here and there, but nothing that felt like a deal-breaker. At least not at the time. The turning point, the moment I should have started paying attention, came when Buffy and I decided to adopt. We couldn't have kids the normal way, Buffy couldn't because of some fertility issues, and after a lot of talking, we made the decision to adopt. It was a huge thing for us, but I was all in. I wanted a family with her. But looking back, Buffy, she wasn't as ready for it as I thought. She put on a good face, but it wasn't long before things started slipping. I should have noticed the signs, the way she'd drink more than usual, come home late after work, or even leave the house for hours without much explanation. When we brought our son into our lives, I thought she'd step up. Instead, she seemed to take a back seat, like she didn't want to be a mom anymore. I was picking up the slack. And I didn't mind. I didn't want to complain. But deep down, something was eating at me. The happy life we'd built was feeling like it was unraveling, and I had no idea how to stop it. Then, there was Brett. I didn't even meet him until a few months after he started working at Buffy's office. Buffy had mentioned him here and there. Some guy who had just started, seemed nice enough. But, of course, I trusted her. There wasn't any reason to be suspicious. But things started to change after Brett showed up. Buffy started staying late at work more often. And when she came home, she'd be different. A little distant, like she was always somewhere else in her head. I asked her about it once, and she shrugged it off. Told me I was being paranoid. I told myself I was being paranoid. Things like this don't happen to normal guys like me, right? Buffy wouldn't cheat. I mean, we were in this together, we were building a life together, we were supposed to be a team. But man, I was so wrong. So wrong. It wasn't until one night, when I found a text on her phone that things started to click. It was a simple message. Nothing crazy. Just a text from Brett asking if she could meet up after work. My heart sank. I knew that wasn't about business. I knew exactly what it meant. But I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I wasn't even sure what to do with what I found. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but, looking back, maybe I should have trusted my gut earlier. Maybe things could have been different if I had. I should have known. The signs were all there, staring me right in the face, but I kept pushing it down, convincing myself that it was nothing. I mean, how could it be? Buffy and I had talked about everything. Our future, our dreams, our son. I thought we were on the same page, but I was fooling myself. After finding that text, I didn't immediately confront her. I wanted to, but I kept hesitating. Part of me was scared of what I might find out. The other part, the part that still wanted to believe in her, kept making excuses. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a friendly work thing. She was stressed, and I wasn't around much with my job either. I started making all kinds of excuses in my head, just to avoid facing the truth. But things didn't get any better. They got worse. Buffy started drinking more, way more. Not just a glass of wine at dinner, but full-on drinking after work. I'd come home to find her half-sloshed, the bottle of wine barely empty, the kid in bed with the TV on because Buffy was too out of it to even notice. It wasn't like this before. She used to be so responsible, so involved. But now, she'd just sit there, staring at her phone, barely talking to me. When she did, it was like we were strangers. I'd ask her about her day, but she'd get defensive, tell me everything was fine, like I was the one being unreasonable. I tried to talk to her about the adoption, about how she needed to step up, but she'd just brush me off. I was taking care of everything at home while she was out late. I was doing the parenting, the housework, all of it. I was drowning. The turning point came one night when I came home a little earlier than usual. I was tired, but I figured I'd surprise her, maybe cook dinner or something, make it feel like old times. I walked into the house, and there she was, on the couch, scrolling through her phone like she hadn't even noticed I came in. She was tipsy, I could tell by her slurred speech. When I asked where our son was, she just mumbled something about him being in his room. But the way she said it didn't sit right. So, I went up to check. He wasn't in his room. I found him in the guest room, lying in his bed. He wasn't asleep. He was just staring at the ceiling. He hadn't even eaten dinner. I felt this pit open up in my stomach, this sickening realization that she didn't care anymore. She wasn't there for him. She wasn't there for me. She wasn't there for us. I called her out on it that night. She got defensive. Claimed I was overreacting, that I needed to calm down and not make everything about me. She started crying, but not the kind of tears you shed when you're sorry. No, these were tears to make me feel guilty, to make me back off. She told me that I was the one who was obsessed with this perfect family, and how it was unrealistic to expect everything to be perfect all the time. It wasn't perfect, but we were trying. I was trying. She wasn't trying anymore. It wasn't long after that when I found the truth. Buffy didn't know it, but I'd started paying closer attention to her phone. She kept it hidden, but I wasn't stupid. One day, when she went out to get more wine, I took it and opened her messages. There it was, staring me in the face. All the texts from Brett. The way they'd been texting each other for weeks. The "I miss yous," the "can't wait to see you" messages, the stupid little emojis that made my stomach twist. But the worst part? She'd been lying to me the whole time. I'd asked her about him before, and she'd denied it. Told me there was nothing between them, that he was just a colleague. She'd been gaslighting me, making me question my own sanity while she was out having an affair. The anger came next, but it wasn't like I expected. I didn't scream or yell, not at first. It was worse than that. It was the coldness that settled in, like I wasn't even mad anymore. I was just numb. I was being betrayed, and for some reason, I wasn't even surprised. That hurt more than anything. I still hadn't confronted her. I didn't know what to say. What do you say to someone who's already shown you who they really are? I knew she'd lie her way out of it. I knew she'd turn it on me. And she did. The next time we had a talk, she swore up and down that it wasn't what it seemed, that it was just a work thing and I was being paranoid. But I was done. I just didn't know it yet. The next few days felt like a blur. Buffy kept acting like nothing had happened. She'd go through the motions, making breakfast, doing laundry, pretending everything was fine, but it was like I was watching a stranger do these things, not my wife. She didn't even try to hide the fact that she was still texting Brett, sneaking around like it was all just some kind of game. Every time I looked at her, I saw it, her lies, her guilt, the betrayal written all over her face. But she wasn't even trying to cover it up anymore. She thought I was too blind or too dumb to see through it. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't act like I didn't know anymore. So I started digging. I went through her stuff, her bag, her emails, her calendar. I found more than I expected. There were trips she'd taken with Brett that I'd never known about. Work conferences, dinners, weekends away, all of it hidden. It was like she'd created this secret life, and I was the last person to know. But what really got me was the fact that she was still playing the victim. Even with everything coming to light, she was acting like I was the problem. She'd tell me she loved me, that it was a complicated situation with Brett, that she didn't know how it happened. She'd cry, beg me to understand, promise it wouldn't happen again. But it was all just smoke and mirrors. The worst part? She never once acknowledged what she was really doing to our family. She never once said, "I'm sorry for what I've done to you. I'm sorry for putting us in this position." No, she was too wrapped up in her own needs to even care about the damage she was causing. It wasn't until one night, when I came home early from work, that things came to a head. I opened the door, and there she was, on the couch, wrapped up in Brett's sweatshirt, half drunk and flipping through Netflix. I could smell the wine before I even stepped inside. It was like she'd turned into this version of herself I didn't recognize. I didn't say anything right away. I just stood there, watching her. I think, in that moment, I realized that the woman I married was gone. She was replaced by someone who didn't care, someone who wasn't even trying to hide her betrayal anymore. I finally spoke. I just asked her how long this had been going on. She hesitated, then told me that it had been a few months, but that it didn't mean anything. I remember feeling this wave of disbelief, like I was hearing the words but not really understanding them. A few months. She'd been lying for months, cheating for months, and I was just the guy left holding the bag. It was hard not to get emotional in that moment. I wanted to scream, to call her every name in the book, but instead, I just walked out of the room. I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't be in the same space as her, knowing what she'd done. That night, I started packing. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't just sit there and let her keep playing me. I wasn't going to wait around while she kept betraying me. So I packed up my things, the things that mattered, the stuff I could take with me. My clothes. My personal items. It wasn't a grand gesture, and honestly, I didn't have the energy for any dramatic confrontation. I just wanted to get out. When Buffy came into the bedroom later, she saw the suitcase. The look on her face was something I'll never forget. Surprised, confused, almost angry, like I was the one who had done something wrong. She asked me what I was doing, why I was leaving. I didn't even try to explain. I just said, "You've made your choice. Now live with it." That was it. I couldn't even look at her anymore. I couldn't be in a relationship where I was constantly questioning everything. I couldn't keep pretending that things were okay when I knew she was out there betraying me, choosing him over our family, over everything we'd built. I walked out that night, and for the first time in months, I felt a weight lift off my chest. It wasn't relief. It wasn't happiness. But it was the beginning of something I wasn't sure about yet, but I knew it had to be better than staying in a lie. The next few days were a blur. I moved my stuff out and filed for divorce. Buffy didn't try to stop me. In fact, she acted like I was inconveniencing her. There was no pleading, no real remorse. She just didn't care. And honestly, I think that was the hardest part. It wasn't the cheating. It wasn't the lies. It was the fact that I wasn't even worth fighting for. The days after I left were harder than I ever imagined they'd be. I thought walking away would feel like a victory, like a final act of reclaiming control. But instead, it felt like I'd jumped off a cliff and was still falling, unsure where the ground would hit. I kept telling myself it was the right thing to do, that I had to get away from her, away from the lies, but the truth was, I wasn't sure I knew who I was anymore. Was I still Josh, the guy who had been married to Buffy for years? Or was I someone else now, someone who was just trying to pick up the pieces? I'd never been the type of guy to dwell on things for too long, but it was impossible not to replay everything in my head over and over. All the good times with Buffy, all the promises we made to each other about growing old together, all the things I'd sacrificed to make this family work. And for what? For her to just throw it all away for some guy she met at work? The whole thing just felt like one big betrayal. I didn't even hear from Buffy for the first couple of days. She didn't call. She didn't text. Nothing. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. She was too busy trying to fix her life, or whatever it was she thought she was doing with Brett. But that silence? It burned. It made me realize that, in the end, I wasn't even a priority for her. It was like she didn't care if I was gone or not. That's when it hit me. I didn't just lose her. I lost myself in that relationship too. The first time I spoke to her after I moved out was when she came to the house to grab some things. She was acting like she had the right to be there, like it was still her home too. But it wasn't anymore. I had made that clear by the time I filed for divorce. She stood in the doorway, looking at me like I was the one who had betrayed her. She told me I was ruining everything, and that the divorce was too extreme. She tried to convince me that she was working on things with Brett, that I needed to be more understanding. Understanding? I couldn't even understand her anymore. What hurt the most was that she never once mentioned our son. It was like he wasn't even a part of the equation for her. She was too wrapped up in Brett, in her own wants and needs, to care about the damage she was causing. I had to ask her, again, about our son, and she gave me some half-assed excuse about working on it and figuring it out. That was the moment I knew she had checked out. She wasn't a mother anymore. She was just some woman who had forgotten what it meant to be part of a family. I could feel my blood boiling, but I didn't want to fight with her. I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of thinking she could still control the narrative. I simply told her that I was done. No more excuses. No more chances. I couldn't keep living in this cycle of lies and betrayal. She didn't fight me on it. I think, deep down, she knew I was done. But even in that moment, she still couldn't bring herself to apologize. Not in any real way. She just stood there, all defensive, trying to make me feel like I was the villain for wanting out of this toxic mess. The hardest part was seeing her walk out of the house with nothing but a few bags, looking just as cold and distant as she had in the last months of our marriage. I couldn't even recognize the woman I'd married anymore. The person who used to care about me, who used to care about us, was gone. And in her place was a woman who couldn't even show any real emotion over what she had done. It was like she had moved on long before I had the chance to catch up. That was the hardest pill to swallow. I had spent so many years trying to be the good husband, the good partner, and now I was just someone she could walk away from without a second thought. It wasn't just the affair. It was the fact that she never even bothered to acknowledge how much she'd hurt me, how much she'd hurt us. I didn't hear from her much after that. A few more texts about the divorce process, but that was it. No real communication. No apology. Just business. It was a strange thing, that silence. On one hand, it felt like I was finally free of the storm that had been raging inside our house for months. But on the other hand, it left this empty space. I was alone. Really alone. And even though I knew I was better off, there was still this ache inside me, this void that I couldn't ignore. I had been with Buffy for so long, and now I had to figure out who I was without her. I spent the next few weeks in a haze, trying to keep busy, trying not to think too much about the wreckage that had been my marriage. Work helped to an extent, but it wasn't enough. I was starting over, not just with my life, but with my heart, and that was harder than I thought it would be. But as much as I hated feeling this way, as much as I hated the uncertainty of it all, I knew one thing. I wasn't going back. Buffy had made her choice. And now, I had to make mine. The first few weeks after the divorce were the hardest, but after a while, something clicked. I realized I was finally free, not just from Buffy, but from the guilt, the constant second-guessing, the emotional toll of being in a relationship with someone who was never really there. I was getting my life back. But it wasn't easy. There were still moments when I'd catch myself missing what I thought I had with Buffy, the family we were supposed to be. But I pushed through it. I had to. The turning point came when I decided to adopt again. After everything with Buffy, I didn't think I'd ever want to open my heart to another child. But the truth was, my son needed me, and I knew I could do more. I couldn't undo the damage Buffy had done, but I could make sure my son grew up in a better environment, with someone who was fully committed to him. That's when I found out about Daisy. She was 14, which was a little older than I had imagined, but when I saw her profile, something clicked. She'd been through a lot in foster care, and I think that's what drew me in. I could see the hurt in her eyes, but also the potential for something better. She wasn't like Buffy, someone who checked out emotionally, but someone who had been let down by the system and the adults around her. I knew I could be different for her. I could show her what real family looked like. It took some time for her to warm up to me. At first, we didn't have much to say, and I didn't force it. But after a few weeks, I could see her starting to trust me. She'd talk to me about school, about what she wanted to do when she was older, and slowly, she started opening up. It wasn't always smooth, but I kept showing up. I kept being there for her, no matter what. That's all she really needed, to know someone cared enough to stick around. And then there was Sarah. She worked at the adoption agency, and at first, I didn't think much of her. But after a few months, I started seeing her in a different light. She was kind, understanding, and she had a genuine passion for helping kids, which was something I respected. It wasn't long before we started spending more time together. We had a lot in common, and she never pushed me or made me feel like I had to rush into anything. It was easy to talk to her. And over time, I realized that I was starting to care about her. I wasn't looking for love. I wasn't even sure I could love again after everything with Buffy. But Sarah was different. She didn't need me to fix her, and I didn't need her to fix me. We just seemed to fit. Two people who had learned from our past mistakes and were ready to move forward. As for Buffy, I couldn't care less about her anymore. She was a chapter in my life that had closed, and I wasn't looking back. I didn't need to get revenge. I didn't need to prove anything to her. I had moved on, and I was finally starting to build the kind of life I'd always wanted. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had my son, I had Daisy, and I was starting to build a future with Sarah. I had everything I needed to move forward, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. Life had a way of knocking me down, but I was getting back up, stronger than ever. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. As the months passed, things started to settle. The pain of the divorce had faded, and I was finally finding my rhythm again. I spent more time with Daisy, and it felt good. We had our ups and downs, but I could see the trust building between us. She wasn't an easy kid to bond with, and I didn't expect miracles overnight, but she was slowly starting to open up. It was like watching a flower begin to bloom, even though it had been stomped on by the world before. I focused on giving her what I hadn't gotten when I was growing up: stability, consistency, and someone who would show up every single day. I wasn't trying to replace anyone in her life. I was just there to offer something different. I made sure she knew she could count on me. Whether it was helping with her homework, picking her up from school, or just sitting down to watch a movie together on a Friday night, I made it clear that she mattered. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something right. Daisy wasn't the only one I had to start building a new relationship with. There was my son, too. He was still adjusting to the divorce, but he was younger and, in many ways, more resilient. The hardest part was watching him navigate the fallout. He loved Buffy, but it was clear she wasn't really there for him anymore, and I wasn't about to let him fall through the cracks. I took on more responsibility with him, made sure he had everything he needed, and worked hard to be the dad he deserved. The hardest part of all was still Buffy's absence. She had completely checked out of the family. I don't think she ever realized how much damage she'd done. It wasn't just that she'd cheated. It was that she'd abandoned her responsibilities as a mother. Every time I thought about how little she cared, I felt a mixture of anger and sadness. It wasn't even the affair anymore. It was that she had decided Brett was more important than the family we built together, more important than our son, more important than me. But I didn't dwell on her anymore. I had my own life to live, and in a way, that made the whole thing easier to swallow. As much as I wanted to confront her, as much as I wanted her to understand the mess she'd made, I realized that it didn't matter. She was never going to get it, and holding on to that anger was only holding me back. Then, there was Sarah. After a few months of spending more time together, it became clear that she wasn't just someone I could talk to about the adoption process. She was someone who genuinely cared about me. I didn't rush things with Sarah, but over time, we became something more than just friends. She was kind, patient, and understood what it meant to start over. She never judged me for my past. She just accepted me for who I was now, and that meant everything to me. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was real. With Sarah, I didn't feel like I had to pretend. I didn't have to hide my scars or the mess that had been my life with Buffy. With Sarah, I could just be me. It wasn't about her fixing me or me fixing her. It was about finding someone who was strong enough to stand by me, no matter how rough things had been. It was around that time that I really started thinking about the future. When I'd first left Buffy, I wasn't sure what was next. I had no idea if I'd ever get my footing back, let alone be able to open my heart to someone again. But now I could see it. I could see a future with Daisy, with my son, and with Sarah. I didn't need Buffy's approval or validation anymore. I had everything I needed right here. Daisy's adoption was finalized about a year after I first met her. It wasn't a fairy tale story, but it was ours. She didn't have a perfect childhood, and neither did I. But we were creating something new, together. And that's what mattered. I couldn't even imagine going back to that old life with Buffy. As much as I wanted to hate her, as much as I still wanted to scream about how much she'd hurt me, I had to let go. I had to let her go. My family was with me now. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what the future held. I was ready for it. Ready to build something real this time, something built on trust, stability, and love. The life I had with Buffy was gone, and in its place was something better. Something I never thought I'd find after everything she did. But I did. I found it, piece by piece. And I wasn't about to let anything or anyone take that away from me. Life after the divorce wasn't exactly what I imagined, but in a lot of ways, it turned out to be better. I didn't have it all figured out, not by a long shot. But day by day, I was building something new, something I could be proud of. The first few months of being on my own were tough. There were still moments when I'd catch myself thinking about Buffy, about how things used to be before everything went sideways. I'd see something that reminded me of our old life, and for a split second, I'd feel that old ache, like I was missing a piece of myself. But then I'd shake it off. I wasn't missing her. I was just missing the idea of what I thought we were. The truth was, that version of my life was gone. It had been gone for a while. And as hard as it was to admit, that was okay. Daisy was a huge part of my new reality. She still had her walls up, but she was starting to let me in. I couldn't replace the people who had failed her, but I could make sure I didn't make the same mistakes. I took on more responsibility with her, not just as a father figure, but as someone she could count on. We didn't always get along. There were days she'd shut herself in her room, days when she'd pull away. But I knew it was part of the process. She had been let down so many times before that it wasn't going to be easy to trust me, or anyone. But I wasn't giving up on her. I promised myself I wouldn't. Work was a good distraction, too. It kept me busy, gave me a sense of normalcy. I threw myself into it, and after a while, I felt like I was starting to hit my stride again. I was good at what I did, and the confidence I built at work started to bleed into my personal life. I wasn't this broken guy anymore. I wasn't the guy Buffy had walked all over. I was a guy with his own goals, his own life. I didn't need her to define who I was anymore. As for my son, things were slowly getting better. He was still adjusting to the divorce, but he had me, and that was enough. Buffy was still MIA. Every once in a while, she'd send a text asking about him, but I could tell she wasn't really interested in being a part of his life. That was fine with me. I didn't need her to show up for him. I was doing it. I had been doing it all along. And that was more than she'd ever done. But the real change, the real thing that shifted everything, was Sarah. I'd never expected to fall for someone so soon after everything with Buffy. In fact, I wasn't sure I was ready for anything serious. But Sarah was different. She wasn't like Buffy. She wasn't looking to fill some void or heal some wound. She was a woman who was comfortable in her own skin, who had her own life and wasn't trying to change me or fix me. It felt like a breath of fresh air. Our relationship wasn't fast-paced, which was probably what made it work. We took things slow, got to know each other in a way I never had with Buffy. There were no grand gestures or desperate attempts to fill some empty space in each other's lives. It was just easy. We talked about everything. Our pasts, our dreams, the things we wanted to do with our lives. She never pushed me for anything. She was patient, understanding. It felt real, and it felt good. Daisy took some time to warm up to Sarah. She didn't want to replace anyone, and I got that. But eventually, they started getting along. Sarah wasn't trying to be her mom. She was just there, a steady presence. I think Daisy started to see that. Over time, I noticed Daisy letting her guard down, even with Sarah. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and that was all I could ask for. I think, for the first time in a long time, I started to believe in the possibility of real happiness. Not the fake kind, the kind where everything's supposed to be perfect, but the kind that comes from real connections. From building something together. With Daisy, with Sarah, and with my son. I was no longer just the guy who had been cheated on. I was a dad, a partner, and a guy who had learned to fight for what mattered. Looking back on everything, I realized that the pain of the divorce, the heartache from Buffy's betrayal, had all led me to this point. I wasn't the same person I was before, but that wasn't a bad thing. I was stronger, more self-aware, and I knew exactly what I wanted out of life. I didn't need Buffy. I didn't need her approval or validation. What I needed was to keep moving forward, to keep building this new life. I still thought about what happened, of course. It was impossible not to. But I wasn't going to let it define me. I was the one who had survived. I was the one who had moved on. And I was finally the one who was living the life I deserved. I knew there would still be challenges ahead. Life always has a way of throwing curveballs, but I felt ready for whatever came my way. Because for the first time, I wasn't doing it alone. It's strange how, one day, you wake up and realize that something you thought would haunt you forever no longer has the same grip on you. It's been a couple of years since the divorce, and honestly, I don't even think about Buffy anymore. There are days when I'll hear her name or see a familiar face from our past, and it'll remind me of everything that went down, but that's it. There's no more anger, no more resentment. I don't even have the urge to dig into her life or try to figure out what went wrong with her. I've learned that letting go doesn't just mean walking away from someone. It means accepting that they're not part of your story anymore. I used to think that the past would always linger, like a shadow, following me around. But time has this way of making everything more distant, more like an old chapter in a book that I can't quite remember in detail. It's there, sure, but it doesn't hold the same power. And once I realized that, I felt a kind of relief I didn't know was possible. The best part? I didn't need to find closure. I didn't need Buffy's apology or explanation. I didn't need any of it. The real closure came from me building something entirely new with the people who mattered. Daisy was the biggest part of that new life. I didn't just adopt her. I embraced her. Every single day. We've had our struggles, sure. She's a teenager with her own baggage, and I'm a dad just trying to get it right. But we've come a long way since the first day I met her. The kid who barely spoke to me now sits down at the dinner table, cracks a joke, and teases me about my cooking. She still has her walls, but they're coming down, little by little. It's not perfect. It'll never be perfect. But it's real, and that's all I need. And then there's my son. Watching him grow up in a stable home, knowing he has both parents who show up, who care about him, that's the real victory. I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing. He's loved, and he knows that. That's more than I can say for what I had growing up. Sarah, too. The more time we spent together, the more I realized how right she was for me. She wasn't some grand, whirlwind romance. I don't think I could have handled that after everything with Buffy, but she was steady. She was there, through all the ups and downs, without any drama or unrealistic expectations. And slowly, I started to let her in. She never pushed. She didn't try to fix me. She just accepted me as I was, broken pieces and all, and that meant everything. It wasn't long before we made it official. We didn't have a big wedding or anything. Nothing fancy. But I didn't need that. What I needed was a sense of stability, of peace, and with Sarah by my side, I felt that every day. I had finally built the family I always wanted. A family that was whole, not because we were perfect, but because we showed up for each other. And I loved them. More than I ever thought I could love again. So, when I started saving up money for a family vacation, it felt like the right thing to do. Egypt had always been on my bucket list, somewhere I dreamed of going when I was younger. But this time, it wasn't about fulfilling some selfish fantasy. It was about creating memories with the people I cared about most. I wanted to show Daisy the world, to give her experiences that would shape her for the rest of her life. I wanted to make memories with Sarah, with my son, so that we could start new traditions as a family. It wasn't easy saving up for it. Between bills, Daisy's school activities, and just regular life stuff, it felt like the money was never enough. But I made it work. I took on extra shifts, skipped a few luxuries, and saved wherever I could. Every time I'd see the account balance go up, I'd feel a sense of pride. We were going to do this. We were going to take that trip, and I was going to show my family something they'd never forget. When the time finally came, we booked our flights, packed our bags, and set out for Cairo. It was surreal to stand in front of the pyramids, knowing I'd worked so hard for this. I remember watching my son's eyes light up as he saw the Great Pyramid for the first time, and seeing Daisy actually smile for the first time in a long while, marveling at the ancient sights. For a moment, I thought about what could have been, what I'd lost, but then I realized something. This was what mattered. This family, this life we were building together, was more than I could have asked for. We had the chance to start over, to make something beautiful out of the wreckage of my past. We didn't need Buffy. We didn't need anyone else. We had each other. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. I had been through a lot. I had been knocked down, betrayed, and broken. But I had risen from that. I had created a new life. I had made it to a place where I could stand tall, without anger or bitterness weighing me down. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't the guy who got cheated on. I was a dad, a husband, a man who had come out on the other side, stronger and better for it. And I was finally at peace. Letting go of Buffy wasn't easy. It took time. But once I did, I found something I never thought I'd have again. Happiness. And it wasn't some fleeting thing, it was real. A life built with people who cared about me, a family that was finally whole. And it was enough. It was more than enough. 6 months after our trip to Egypt, Sarah and I got married. It wasn't a grand event, nothing like the big wedding Buffy and I had once planned. But in its own way, it was perfect. It was just us, surrounded by the people who truly mattered. Daisy, my son, and a few close friends were there to witness it. We had a small ceremony at the same park where I'd taken Daisy for ice cream the first time I met her. It was a place that felt familiar, safe, like it was meant to be part of this new life I was building. Sarah and I didn't need the big spectacle. We didn't need fancy vows or a hall full of people. What mattered was the quiet strength of our commitment, the way we had already built something real without needing anyone's approval. The vows we made to each other that day were simple: to love, to support, and to never stop growing together. And I meant every word. Sarah had been with me through the hardest parts of my life, through the lowest moments, and she was still here. That meant more than anything. Daisy was my maid of honor, and my son stood by my side as best man. I remember watching them both, so proud of how far they'd come, how much we had all come together. Daisy had her teenage awkwardness, sure, but she was a different person than the girl who had walked into our lives just a few years ago. She had blossomed into someone who laughed easily and trusted more, someone who finally understood that family wasn't about blood, it was about love. A few weeks later, we celebrated Daisy's 16th birthday. It was a small party, just cake, a few presents, and a bunch of balloons scattered around the living room. But it was the most beautiful celebration I could have imagined. Daisy was happy. For the first time in a long time, she seemed at ease. She had friends over, and we all hung out together, just enjoying each other's company. And then, during her birthday toast, she said something that hit me harder than I expected. She stood up, glass in hand, and with a smile that could have lit up the whole room, she said, "I'm so grateful to my parents. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be as happy as I am right now. I wouldn't have a family, I wouldn't have a home, and I wouldn't know what it feels like to be truly loved." I think that was the moment I truly understood how much we had all healed, how far we had come since the days of chaos, confusion, and pain. It wasn't just a birthday speech, it was a recognition of how deep our bond had become. Daisy wasn't just thanking me, she was thanking us. Sarah, my son, the family we had built. The family that had taken time to grow but now felt so natural, so real, that it was hard to remember what life was like before. It felt like we had always been together, like this was the way it was meant to be from the start. There were no gaps in our family anymore. No awkward silences. No reminders of what had been lost. Every day felt like a new beginning, a new chance to grow stronger together. The way we cared for each other was different now. It wasn't just about doing what needed to be done, it was about doing it because we wanted to. Sarah would make breakfast for everyone on Sunday mornings, and I'd clean up after dinner because it felt like the right thing to do, not because it was expected. Daisy would ask how my day was going without me having to prompt her. My son, who had always been quiet, would just sit beside me while we watched TV, content in the simple closeness of it all. The house felt alive with care. There were little notes on the fridge, little inside jokes that had developed over time, moments of laughter that seemed to come out of nowhere. It was a home in every sense of the word. It wasn't about the roof over our heads, the furniture we had, or the money we made. It was about the love we shared. It was about the kind of warmth that radiated through the walls just by being together. It's funny. You go through so much and wonder if you'll ever be able to trust again, to open yourself up to something real. And then, just when you think you're done with love, you realize it's been right there in front of you all along. It just takes time. It takes effort. It takes a willingness to believe in something better, even after everything you've been through. Daisy and my son, both of them had healed in ways I hadn't expected. Sure, there were still moments of doubt, moments where they'd retreat to their rooms or shut down emotionally. But they were different. They were whole in a way that Buffy and I never were. They were loved. They were cherished. They were exactly where they needed to be. Sarah and I would look at each other across the dinner table sometimes, and we didn't need to say anything. We just knew. We knew that this was it. This was the life we had built together. No more looking back. No more regrets. It's strange to think how one chapter of my life could end in such a painful way, but in the end, that pain created something beautiful. I had learned that life doesn't owe you anything. It doesn't give you what you expect, and it doesn't always go the way you plan. But sometimes, when you least expect it, you find that what you needed all along was something you never could have imagined. A family that fits, a love that grows, and a life that's finally yours. And I'm so damn grateful for that. Every day. Every moment. Grateful. When I look at Sarah now, after everything we've been through, I think our love has only grown stronger. It hasn't faded, not even for a second. It has grown deeper, more passionate, more tender over time. There are days when I still feel a rush of excitement when she walks into a room, as if I'm seeing her for the first time. And other days, I look at her and give thanks for the quiet moments, when we are lying on the couch together, or talking quietly over dinner, or just living side by side. There's a peace in those moments, too, that makes me appreciate everything we've built. I never thought love could be so permanent, so lasting. The way we support each other, challenge each other, and find new ways to fall in love every day. It's like we're still discovering each other, even after all this time. I never thought love could develop like this, but with Sarah it's like we've created something that only gets better the longer we're together. I'm happier now than I've ever been. Life isn't perfect and we still face challenges, but there is a joy in my life that comes from knowing that Sarah is by my side. She's not just my wife, she's my partner in everything. And every time I see her smile, hear her laugh, or feel her hand in mine, I am reminded how incredibly lucky I am to have her. Our love is not something we take for granted. It is the most beautiful thing in my life, and every day I wake up feeling grateful for it. I know we have something rare and precious, and I'm not going to waste a single moment of it. My life is better because of her, and I can honestly say that I am more content, more peaceful and more in love than I ever thought possible.